I never imagined I'd be the guy sitting here, typing out my life unraveling in real time, but here I am. I always thought these stories were the kind of thing that happened to other people, people who ignored obvious red flags, people in doomed relationships that were bound to fail from the start. Not me. Not us. But looking back now, I realize how blind I was, how many signs were there that I either missed or refused to see. My wife, Jennifer, and I have been together for nearly a decade, married for 7 years, and for the most part, I thought we had a solid marriage. We were both career-driven, with her working in marketing and me in IT, and we lived a comfortable life, balancing work, friends, and the occasional lazy weekend together. Kids were something we had talked about in a vague, maybe in a few years kind of way, but there was no rush. Lately, though, something between us had shifted, and I felt it before I understood what it meant. Jennifer had always been busy with work, but suddenly, she was busier. Late nights at the office became a regular occurrence, and she would come home exhausted, distracted, and uninterested in engaging with me in any meaningful way. I chalked it up to stress, deadlines, demanding clients, whatever excuse made the most sense at the time, but something in the way she carried herself was different. She was glued to her phone constantly, always texting, always checking her notifications, and yet, if I so much as glanced at her screen, she'd angle it away or turn it face down like it was second nature. Her laughter, once so easy and unguarded around me, became something she saved for her phone, for whoever was on the other end of those conversations. Still, I said nothing. I trusted her. Then, 2 weeks ago, she dropped the first real bombshell. The night before, she casually mentioned that she had to go on a last-minute work retreat over the weekend. It was supposedly one of those company-sponsored team-building getaways, the kind where they hole everyone up in a hotel conference room and make them sit through mind-numbing seminars. Normally, she would at least give me a little heads-up about work trips, but this time, she told me so late that I barely had time to ask any questions. She seemed almost rushed as she packed, throwing things into her bag with an efficiency that felt rehearsed, like she had done this before. Friday morning, she barely even looked at me as she left, tossing out a quick, "See you Sunday night," before she walked out the door. Something about the way she said it felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on why. Still, I pushed the feeling down and told myself I was overthinking. I spent the weekend keeping myself busy, cleaning up around the house, playing video games, meeting up with a friend for a few beers, but something about the silence in the house felt heavier than usual. She didn't call, didn't check in beyond a couple of short texts about how the retreat was long and exhausting. And then Sunday night rolled around, and she came home looking anything but exhausted. I remember the moment she walked through the door. Her entire demeanor was off. I expected her to be tired, maybe even grumpy, but instead, she looked refreshed, like she had just come back from a spa weekend rather than a grueling corporate retreat. Her hair was different, not dramatically so, but styled in a way that looked more put together than someone who had supposedly been sitting through endless meetings all weekend. And then there was the perfume. She smelled different, like a scent I had never noticed on her before, floral and expensive. It wasn't something she usually wore, and it hit me immediately, making my stomach twist. I tried to shake it off as paranoia, but the feeling gnawed at me. When I asked her about the trip, her answers were short, vague, like she was reciting something rehearsed. "Oh, just the usual. Meetings, icebreakers, team-building nonsense," she said, not even looking up from her bag as she unpacked. I kept pressing. Who did she room with? What kind of meetings? Did anything interesting happen? But every answer was generic and dismissive, like she couldn't be bothered to elaborate. It was the way she talked about it, like she just wanted to get through the conversation as quickly as possible, that made my unease solidify into something real. But still, I said nothing. I told myself I was being paranoid, that if I started questioning her every move, I'd turn into one of those jealous, overbearing husbands who suffocate their wives with baseless accusations. So I let it go. I let it slide even though everything in my gut screamed that something wasn't right. I probably would have convinced myself to forget about it entirely if not for what happened a few days later. It was a normal afternoon at work when I found myself mindlessly scrolling through our shared credit card statement. It wasn't something I did often, but every now and then, I liked to check in on our spending. And that's when I saw it. A charge for a lakeside cottage rental. I froze. At first, I thought maybe it was part of the work retreat, that her company had booked a place and she had just used her card for some reason. But when I looked up the place, my stomach dropped. This wasn't a conference center or some business-friendly hotel. It was a secluded, romantic getaway, a small, cozy cottage tucked away near a quiet lake, the kind of place you book for anniversaries, honeymoons, or something else. For a second, I just sat there, staring at the screen, my heart pounding so loudly in my ears that I could barely hear my own thoughts. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe she had used the wrong card by accident. Maybe it was some kind of mix-up. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Why would she be paying for it out of pocket if this was a company trip? And why had she been so cagey when I asked about the weekend? My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the transaction history, looking for anything else that stood out, but this was the only glaringly obvious anomaly. And yet, that single charge was enough to make my entire world tilt on its axis. I felt sick, like I was about to be pulled into something I couldn't escape. I didn't have proof, at least, not yet, but I had something even worse. A gut feeling that I could no longer ignore. And that was just the beginning. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the credit card charge, my stomach twisting itself into knots. My logical brain kept trying to come up with explanations, rationalizing what I was seeing, but deep down, I already knew. There was no reason for Jennifer to have booked a romantic lakeside cottage for a work retreat, especially not with her personal card. The math wasn't adding up, and the more I sat with it, the angrier I became. My mind started spiraling, replaying every odd moment from the past few months, the late nights, the sudden obsession with her phone, the way she had looked different when she came home from the retreat. All of it pointed to one thing, and I hated that I had ignored my instincts for so long. I wasn't about to confront her without more proof, though. I needed to know the truth, and I needed something undeniable. That night, I tried to act normal, but my mind was racing. Jennifer seemed completely at ease, scrolling through her phone, laughing at something on the screen while I sat there pretending to watch TV. I told myself to wait, to be patient, but the longer I watched her act like nothing was wrong, the more I felt like I was going to explode. I had access to our shared accounts, but I didn't have her personal login information. However, I did know that she often left her laptop open when she was working from home, and she wasn't exactly the best at covering her tracks. If she was hiding something, it had to be somewhere, an email, a message, something that would confirm what I already suspected. The opportunity came the next morning. Jennifer had an early meeting and rushed out of the house, leaving her laptop on the dining table. My heart was hammering in my chest as I walked over, hands slightly trembling as I lifted the screen. It was still logged in. I clicked on her email first, scanning through the inbox for anything that stood out. At first, it was just the usual, work-related stuff, promotional emails, nothing out of the ordinary. But then I saw it. A confirmation email from the cottage rental service, thanking her for her stay. I opened it, my pulse thundering in my ears as I read the details. It was booked for 2 people. My hands clenched into fists as I scrolled further, feeling my stomach drop when I saw the check-in date, Friday morning, the same day she told me she was leaving for the work retreat. There was no work retreat. She had spent the entire weekend in a romantic lakeside cottage, and she hadn't been alone. I felt a wave of nausea rise up, my entire body going cold as reality settled in. My chest felt tight, and for a few moments, I just sat there, trying to catch my breath. My brain was screaming at me to stop, to close the laptop and pretend I never saw it. But I couldn't. I needed to know who it was. I clicked over to her messages, my fingers hesitating before typing in a search. I didn't have to search long. There he was, Brian, a guy from her office. I recognized his name because she had mentioned him before, but only in passing. He was just a coworker, someone she occasionally had to collaborate with, nothing more. But the messages between them told a completely different story. My hand shook as I scrolled through the texts, my eyes scanning over weeks, maybe even months, of conversations. It wasn't just work talk. It was personal, flirty, intimate in a way that made my blood boil. She had been confiding in him, telling him things she hadn't told me in months, laughing with him the way she used to laugh with me. And then, as I kept scrolling, I found the worst of it, plans for their weekend together, confirmations of the cottage reservation, jokes about sneaking around and how thrilling it was to keep it a secret. My vision blurred with rage as I read Jennifer telling him how much she couldn't wait to finally have time alone with him, how much she had missed him since the last time they had been together. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was something that had been going on behind my back for God knows how long. I slammed the laptop shut, my whole body shaking with anger. I couldn't believe it. The woman I had trusted, the woman I had built a life with, had been lying to my face for months. And not just lying, she had been enjoying it. She had been laughing behind my back, sneaking around, making plans with another man while I sat at home, completely oblivious. My hands curled into fists as I tried to steady my breathing, but the betrayal cut so deep that I didn't even know what to do with myself. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to call her right then and there and demand an explanation, but I knew that if I confronted her in the heat of the moment, I wouldn't be able to control myself. I needed to think. I needed a plan. I spent the rest of the day pacing the house, replaying everything in my mind. I thought about all the times she had come home late, the times she had dismissed my concerns with a casual wave of her hand, the way she had looked at her phone and smiled when she thought I wasn't paying attention. How long had this been going on? Had I been nothing more than a placeholder while she got her thrills elsewhere? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I wasn't going to let her gaslight me. I wasn't going to let her lie her way out of this. I needed undeniable proof, something she couldn't explain away, something that would force her to admit what she had done. That night, I waited for her to come home, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to act normal. She walked through the door, smiling as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't spent the weekend wrapped up with another man in some cozy lakeside cottage. I clenched my fist under the table, forcing myself to stay calm, to bide my time. Because the confrontation was coming, and I was going to make damn sure she wouldn't be able to weasel her way out of it. I spent the entire night lying awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind running in circles. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those messages between Jennifer and Brian, heard her laughter in my head, imagined them together in that damn cottage. The weight of the betrayal sat on my chest like a cinder block, and no matter how much I tried to calm myself down, the anger only grew. By the time morning came, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to let her lie her way out of this. I wasn't going to play the fool any longer. I had the proof. I had seen the receipts, the texts, the emails. I wasn't going to ask her if she had cheated. I knew she had. And now, it was time to see if she had the guts to admit it. Jennifer came downstairs that morning like nothing was wrong, hair still damp from the shower, scrolling through her phone as she sipped her coffee. She looked up at me, smiling like she hadn't just spent an entire weekend sneaking around behind my back, like she hadn't been laughing with another man about how easy it was to lie to me. "Morning," she said casually, setting her mug down as she sat at the kitchen island. I felt the rage boiling in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm, to keep my voice steady. "How was the retreat?" I asked, watching her reaction closely. She didn't even hesitate, didn't even flinch. "Ugh, boring as hell," she sighed, rolling her eyes. "You know how those things are. Just a bunch of pointless meetings and team-building exercises. I swear, I would have rather been anywhere else." My hands clenched under the table as I stared at her, feeling something inside me snap. She was lying to my face so effortlessly, so smoothly, like it was second nature to her. I reached for my phone, pulling up the email I had found the day before. I slid it across the counter toward her, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Is that so?" I said, keeping my voice level. "Because this says otherwise." She frowned, glancing down at the screen, and for the first time, I saw it, a flicker of panic in her eyes. Her face went pale as she read the confirmation email from the cottage rental, the details of her romantic weekend getaway staring back at her in black and white. I watched as she tried to compose herself, tried to find some way to spin this in her favor, but she wasn't fast enough. "Care to explain?" I asked, my voice sharp, my patience gone. Jennifer opened her mouth, closed it, then swallowed hard before attempting to speak. She started, shaking her head. "I don't know what this is. Maybe there was some kind of mistake." "Don't," I cut her off, slamming my hand down on the counter. "Do not sit here and insult my intelligence. I saw the texts, Jennifer. I know everything. The cottage. Brian. The plans you made. So don't you dare try to stand there and lie to me right now." Her face crumpled for a split second, but then, unbelievably, she had the audacity to get defensive. "Why were you going through my stuff?" she snapped, crossing her arms. "That's an invasion of privacy." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head in disbelief. "That's what you're upset about? That I found out? Not the fact that you were screwing around behind my back, not the fact that you've been sneaking around for God knows how long? Your privacy? Are you serious right now?" She exhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair, avoiding my eyes. "Look, it's not what you think," she said, her voice shaking. "Brian and we got close, but it's not like—" "Oh, spare me," I snapped, cutting her off again. "I read the messages, Jennifer. I know what you did. I know this wasn't the first time. I know you've been lying to my face, coming home to me while sneaking off with him. My voice cracked, and I hated how raw it sounded, hated that she had made me feel this way, that she had turned me into this bitter, broken mess. Jennifer finally dropped the act, rubbing her temples like she was the victim here. I don't know what to tell you, she muttered, shaking her head. It just happened. It just happened? I repeated, my voice thick with disgust. So what? You just tripped and fell into an affair? You just accidentally booked a romantic cottage with your coworker? Spare me the bullshit, Jennifer. You made a choice. Over and over again, you made a choice. She let out a heavy sigh, like this was some kind of inconvenience for her, like my anger was nothing more than an annoyance she had to deal with. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she said, finally looking at me. I was unhappy, okay? I felt like we were stuck, like we were just going through the motions, and Brian, he made me feel alive again. My stomach twisted at her words. Alive again. Like I had been draining the life out of her, like I was some weight dragging her down. So instead of talking to me, instead of telling me how you felt, you decided to run off and start sneaking around with someone else? That's your excuse. I didn't plan for this to happen, she said again, her voice quiet. But once it did, I didn't know how to stop. I stood there, staring at the woman I had built my life with, the woman I had trusted, the woman who had looked me in the eyes for months while living a double life, and I realized something. I didn't even recognize her anymore. This wasn't the woman I fell in love with. That woman wouldn't have done this. That woman wouldn't have shattered everything we built together like it meant nothing. I took a deep breath, my entire body shaking with the effort to keep myself from completely losing it. You know what? I said finally, my voice eerily calm. I don't even care anymore. You made your choice, Jennifer. And now, I'm making mine. Her eyes widened slightly, like she hadn't expected me to say it. What do you mean? I mean we're done. The words felt final, felt right. I'm not going to sit here and fight for someone who threw me away like I was nothing. You can have Brian. You can have whatever alive again feeling he gives you. But you're not going to have me anymore. Her mouth opened like she wanted to argue, like she wanted to fight back, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door, slamming it behind me. Because there was nothing left to say, nothing left to salvage. The woman I thought I knew was gone, and I wasn't going to waste another second begging for someone who never truly valued me to begin with. I drove for hours, aimlessly circling the city, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My chest felt like it was caving in, my mind a hurricane of rage, betrayal, and something far worse, heartbreak. I had spent years with Jennifer, built a life with her, trusted her with everything I had, and in return, she had lied, cheated, and looked me in the eyes every single day like nothing was wrong. It wasn't just the affair that shattered me, it was the way she acted like it didn't even matter. The way she had tried to brush it off with excuses, how she had dared to blame me for how she felt, as if her running around with Brian was some kind of twisted self-care routine instead of a gut-wrenching betrayal. I kept replaying the confrontation over and over in my head, hearing her say he made me feel alive again, and it made me want to scream. What was I to her, then? Some lifeless obligation she had outgrown? A placeholder while she went off to find herself with another man? I finally pulled into an empty parking lot near a park, shutting off the engine and dropping my head against the steering wheel. My body felt heavy, my head throbbing with exhaustion, but my mind refused to stop spinning. Part of me had expected to feel some kind of relief after walking out that door, after telling her we were done, but instead, there was only an unbearable emptiness. It hit me then. This was real. This wasn't just some argument we could fix, some temporary setback we could move past. Our marriage, our home, our future, all of it had just gone up in flames, and there was no putting the pieces back together. I had never thought about life without Jennifer before. Even when things started to feel distant between us, I had never let myself believe we were actually falling apart. But now, there was no denying it. I wasn't going back. And she wasn't coming after me. The worst part of it all was knowing that this wasn't something she regretted. If I hadn't caught her, if I hadn't confronted her with undeniable proof, she would have kept sneaking around, kept lying to my face, kept coming home to me every night while texting him under the table. I wondered how many times she had sat across from me at dinner, reading a message from Brian and smiling at her phone while I sat there like an idiot, thinking she was just checking work emails. I thought about every time she had kissed me goodbye before leaving the house, every time she had told me she loved me, and I felt sick knowing that it had all been a lie. It made my skin crawl to think that the woman I had devoted my life to had been leading a double life right under my nose. And the worst part? I had trusted her so completely that I never even saw it coming. I stayed in that parking lot for what felt like hours, my phone buzzing every now and then with messages from friends, a couple from Jennifer, though I didn't bother reading them. I wasn't ready. I wasn't sure if I ever would be. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew, the sun had started to set, casting long shadows over the pavement. My stomach growled, reminding me that I hadn't eaten all day, but I felt too hollow, too drained to even think about food. The only thing I knew for certain was that I couldn't go back to the house, not yet. Maybe not ever. The idea of walking through that door, of seeing our things, our life together, knowing what she had done, was unbearable. Instead, I drove to my best friend's place. Matt had been my closest friend since college, the kind of guy who always had my back, no matter what. When I showed up at his doorstep, he took one look at me and knew something was wrong. "Dude," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "What the hell happened?" I didn't even know where to begin. I collapsed onto his couch, exhaling sharply as I ran a hand over my face. "She cheated," I said finally, my voice hoarse. "Jennifer. She's been seeing someone else. Some guy from work." The words felt foreign on my tongue, like I was talking about someone else's life, someone else's nightmare. Matt's expression darkened, and he let out a low curse before shaking his head. "Man, I'm so sorry," he said, sitting across from me. "You want to talk about it?" And for the first time, I did. I told him everything, the late nights, the secrecy, the weekend at the cottage, the texts, the confrontation. Every detail spilled out of me like a flood, and with each word, the weight on my chest got heavier instead of lighter. By the time I finished, Matt was sitting back in his chair, shaking his head in disbelief. "That's messed up," he said, his jaw tight. "You didn't deserve that, man. And you know what? Screw her. She made her choice. Let her live with it." I nodded, but deep down, it didn't feel that simple. I wanted to be angry, was angry, but beneath the rage was an overwhelming sadness, a grief for something that was already gone. I had loved Jennifer. I had trusted her with everything. And now, I had to accept that the woman I thought she was had never really existed. She had made her choice. And now, I had to figure out how to move forward with mine. The days that followed were a blur of emotions, rage, sorrow, disbelief, and a kind of numbness I had never felt before. The reality of the situation weighed on me like a crushing force, and no matter how much I tried to push it aside, it clung to me, suffocating every moment. Jennifer tried calling a few times, sending texts that alternated between desperate attempts to explain and infuriatingly hollow justifications. "We need to talk. Please, let's figure this out. I never wanted to hurt you." I ignored every single one. I wasn't ready to hear her voice, wasn't ready to sit across from her and watch her twist the truth into something she could live with. I had already wasted enough time letting her take control of the narrative. Now, I needed to be the one to decide how this ended. I stayed at Matt's place for a few days, unable to bring myself to step foot in the house I had shared with Jennifer. Every time I thought about it, I imagined her there, sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, texting him. I imagined the kitchen where we had shared late-night talks over drinks, where I had made her breakfast on lazy Sunday mornings, now tainted with the knowledge that it had all been a lie. The bedroom where we had once fallen asleep side by side, where she had told me she loved me while thinking about someone else. The thought of being in that space, surrounded by memories that had turned to poison, made my skin crawl. But as much as I wanted to avoid it forever, I knew I had to face it eventually. When I finally returned, the house felt eerily empty, like it was no longer mine. I had lived there for years, but now, everything felt foreign, like I was standing in someone else's home. Jennifer wasn't there when I arrived, though I had no doubt she had been expecting me to come back eventually. I walked through the house slowly, taking in the remnants of what had once been our life together. The framed photos on the shelves, the clothes still hanging in the closet, the small touches of her that were scattered throughout every room. It all felt like a cruel joke, a reminder of how seamlessly she had been able to live a double life without me ever suspecting a thing. I knew I couldn't stay. Staying would mean suffocating in the memories, drowning in the what-ifs and the never-agains. I wasn't going to let this place become a tomb for everything she had destroyed. So I started packing. Not everything, not yet, but enough to get me through the next few weeks while I figured out what came next. The process was agonizing. Every drawer I opened, every piece of clothing I folded, felt like another stab to the gut. I found old anniversary cards she had written, notes she had left for me in the past, and I had to fight the urge to tear them to shreds. How many of those words had been lies? Had she been writing those messages while sneaking around behind my back, playing the part of the devoted wife while secretly planning weekend getaways with another man? Jennifer came home while I was packing, and for a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other from opposite sides of the room. She looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed like she had been crying, but I didn't feel sympathy. I didn't feel anything but cold detachment. She had done this. She had made this choice. And now, she had to live with it. "You're leaving?" she asked softly, as if she hadn't expected it to come to this. I nodded, zipping up the duffel bag I had filled. "Yeah," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "I can't stay here." She took a step forward, hesitating like she wanted to reach out, but I didn't move. Can we talk?" she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I know you hate me, but please, just let me explain." I let out a hollow laugh, shaking my head. "Explain what, Jennifer? That you lied to me? That you snuck around behind my back? That you spent months pretending to be my wife while you were running around with him?" I exhaled sharply, running a hand through my hair. What could you possibly say to make any of this okay? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Because there was nothing to say. No excuse, no justification, no apology that could undo what she had done. I had given her my trust, my love, my commitment, and she had taken it for granted. She had shattered it without a second thought. And now, it was too late. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. I scoffed. "Yeah? Well, you did. And now you have to live with that." I slung my bag over my shoulder, giving the house one last glance before heading for the door. Jennifer called my name, her voice desperate, but I didn't stop. I walked out, closing the door behind me, and just like that, it was over. No dramatic final fight, no last-minute begging, just a quiet, inevitable ending to something that had already been dead long before I discovered the truth. The next few weeks were hard. The grief hit me in waves, unpredictable and suffocating. Some days, I was fine, angry but functional, determined to move on. Other days, it felt like I was drowning, crushed under the weight of everything I had lost. I had moments where I questioned everything, where I wondered if there had been a way to fix things, if I had missed some sign that could have saved us. But the truth was, there was nothing left to save. Jennifer had made her choice long before I had discovered the affair, and I had made mine the moment I walked out that door. The divorce process started quickly. I wasn't interested in dragging it out or making it more painful than it had to be. We didn't have kids, which made things easier, and splitting assets was a necessary evil rather than a battleground. Jennifer didn't fight me on anything. Not that it would have mattered if she had. I was done being the fool. I was done fighting for something that was already gone. It took time, but eventually the anger began to fade. The sadness lingered longer, but even that started to dull, replaced by something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. I realized that as much as it hurt, as much as the betrayal had nearly broken me, I was free now. Free from the lies, from the doubt, from the constant second-guessing. Jennifer had made her bed, and I had walked away from it, refusing to lie in it any longer. Looking back, I wish I had seen the signs sooner. I wish I had trusted my gut instead of dismissing my instincts. But more than anything, I wish I had known my own worth before she had the chance to make me question it. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that love should never be a guessing game. If someone truly loves you, you shouldn't have to wonder if they're being honest, if they're being faithful, if they still want to be there. Love isn't built on secrecy. It's built on trust. And the moment that trust is gone, so is everything else. So, if anyone reading this has that nagging feeling in their gut, that little voice telling them something isn't right, listen to it. Don't be the fool I was. Don't ignore the signs. Because once the truth comes out, there's no going back. And no one, no matter how much you love them, is worth sacrificing your self-respect for. The first few months after the divorce were the hardest. Even though I knew leaving was the only choice, even though I had all the proof in the world that Jennifer had never truly valued what we had, the weight of the betrayal still lingered. It wasn't just about losing her. It was about losing the version of myself that had believed in her, that had trusted her, that had thought we were building something real. The nights were the worst. The quietness of being alone settled into my bones in a way I wasn't prepared for. I had spent years coming home to someone, even if, towards the end, that someone had been lying to my face every single day. Now, there was just silence, and in that silence, my thoughts turned against me. I found myself reliving every moment I had ignored, every sign I had dismissed, every time she had looked me in the eye and told me she loved me while she was out planning another weekend with him. It made me sick. It made me angry. But most of all, it made me realize that healing wasn't going to come easy. I had to force myself to start over, The house was the first thing to go. I couldn't stay there, surrounded by ghosts of what we used to be, haunted by memories that had turned into nothing but lies. I sold it within a few months, packed up what little I actually wanted to keep, and found a new place, smaller, quieter, something that was mine and mine alone. Moving out felt like shedding an old skin, peeling away the last remnants of the life Jennifer and I had built. I didn't want to be surrounded by anything that reminded me of her, of the woman who had so easily betrayed me. I got rid of furniture we had picked out together, donated clothes she had bought me, erased her presence from my space as much as I possibly could. And still, some nights, I swore I could hear her voice, swore I could feel the weight of her lies lingering in the air. It wasn't just about removing her from my surroundings, it was about removing her from me. The hardest part wasn't the anger. That, at least, gave me something to hold on to. It was the sadness that crept in unexpectedly, the grief that came in waves, knocking me down when I least expected it. It was the quiet moments when I wasn't distracted by work or friends, when I was alone with my thoughts, that I felt the depth of the loss the most. I didn't miss her, not really. I missed the version of her I had believed in. I missed the life I had thought I was living. And that realization made everything even more infuriating. Because I hadn't just lost a wife, I had lost years. I had spent so much time believing in something that had never really existed, investing in a person who had been looking elsewhere for fulfillment while I sat there, unknowingly playing the role of the loyal, devoted husband. That bitterness was hard to shake, but I knew I had to. I couldn't let what she did define the rest of my life. I refused to let her betrayal be the thing that shaped me forever. So I started rebuilding, piece by piece. I went back to the gym, pushing myself harder than I had in years, letting the physical exhaustion drown out the emotional turmoil. I reconnected with friends I had drifted from, throwing myself into nights out, long conversations, anything that reminded me that my world was bigger than Jennifer. I picked up hobbies I had put aside, rediscovering the parts of myself that had been buried under years of compromise. I learned how to enjoy being alone, how to sit with my thoughts without letting them consume me. It was slow, it was painful, but it was necessary. Jennifer reached out a few times after the divorce was finalized. The first time, I ignored it. The second time, I deleted the message without even reading it. But the third time, curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. It was a long, rambling apology, full of the same excuses she had thrown at me before. I didn't mean for it to happen. I was lost. I was confused. I miss you. I regret everything. I stared at the words, feeling absolutely nothing. There was a time when that message might have broken me, when hearing that she regretted it might have given me pause. But now? Now, it just felt pathetic. She wasn't reaching out because she truly missed me. She was reaching out because she missed the version of herself that I had given her, the stability I had provided, the unwavering trust she had so carelessly shattered. She didn't get to have that anymore. She didn't get to rewrite the story to make herself feel better. I didn't respond. I never planned to. Some things don't deserve closure. Some people don't deserve a second chance to explain themselves. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. And mine was to leave her in the past where she belonged. Now, months later, I can finally say I'm okay. Not perfect, not fully healed, but okay. I don't wake up every morning with the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. I don't flinch when I hear her name. I don't feel the same raw, burning anger that used to consume me every time I thought about what she did. I've learned to live without her, to build something new from the wreckage she left behind. And for the first time in a long time, I feel free. If there's one thing I've taken from all of this, it's that you can survive the things you think will break you. You can lose everything you thought you needed and still come out the other side stronger. You can rebuild, even when it feels impossible. And most importantly, you can learn to trust again, not in other people, necessarily, but in yourself. And your own ability to pick yourself up, to keep moving forward, to find happiness in places you never expected. Jennifer was a chapter in my life, but she wasn't the whole story. And now, for the first time in a long time, I'm ready to start writing the next one, without her.